Nobody touches that train. Nobody! We don't have a cleared scene. You step onto that roadway. You're interfering with a federal incident. Every bit of it comes down on you, Amos.
Amos Gaines answered him by stepping down onto the roadway and driving his boot into the jammed door of the second car. Once, twice. On the third kick, the buckled steel folded inward and smoke rolled out of the gap.
Sir! That third rail is live! You cannot be down on that!
Then cut it.
Blue light box, top of the platform, on the pillar. Lift the cover, trip the breaker, kill the power to this section down. Everybody who can hear me call. Nobody in this car dies tonight. But you do exactly what I say when I say it.
Get off the seats, get down under the smoke, and find my voice.
Amos!
You walk into that train, you are done at this authority. Do you hear me? Done!
Then you'll know where to mail the paperwork.
It's Dr. Brown's run!
And up on the platform, a woman with her phone held over her head could not tell, from where she stood, whether she was watching a man save 7 people or hurt them. She was wrong about what she was seeing. She would not be the last. In a tunnel gone black in the middle of a Tuesday night, 7 people who had every reason to panic got quiet, got low, and found his voice. Amos Gaines went in. The train had come off the rail, pulling out of Halstead at 9:52. Front cars in the tunnel, rear cars still at the lit platform. The second car, the one Amos stood over, had wrenched sideways, jammed its doors, and gone black. He wasn't even supposed to be here. He was off shift, riding home in the third car. That was the first thing that would matter later, and the last thing that mattered now. He read the smoke in a single glance, gray, thin, sliding along the ceiling toward the back of the car, which told him 3 things fast. A fire up front, the tunnel pulling its breath backward toward the 7, and minutes, not hours. It meant the front doors were a grave and the back was a chance. That he knew all of that before anyone else had found their phone flashlight was the first thing about him that didn't add up. There would be more. "Names?" he said, moving down the tilted aisle, one hand trailing the seatbacks so he'd never be lost, even if his lamp died. "Call them out so I know where every one of you is." "Renata." A woman's voice, low, near the middle, steadier than the situation had any right to make it. "I've got a man next to me, older, hit his head in and out, and there's a kid in the back corner, his legs stuck under something." "How many total? Count heads. I need the number." A ragged chorus sorted itself in the black, and Renata pulled it into order. 7. We're 7. 7. He set the number down in the front of his mind like a stone on a map and put his whole weight on it. He had lost a number once, in a different dark, and made a promise over it he had kept every night since. He was not going to lose this one. "Okay, 7. Here's how this goes, and if you do it my way, you all go home." He crouched so the ones who could see anything could see his face in the wash of his lamp, because in the dark a face is worth more than light. A face is what people decide to follow. We are not going out the front. The front is where the trouble is. We go out the back, down onto the walkway on the left side, the far side from the third rail, and up the tunnel about 90 feet to an emergency door I promise you is there because I've walked past it every night for 6 years. The smoke's going to drop and get worse first. So the only thing you keep in your head is this: find the air, then find the door. The good air is low. Stay under the smoke, stay on my voice, and I'll hand every one of you onto that walkway myself. Up on the platform, Wexler was already on his radio, and the words he chose were the neat procedural kind that would be read back in a very different room a week later, stripped of the fear that made them. Unauthorized mail on the roadway, forcing doors, refusing to comply. But the young cop did the opposite of his supervisor. Officer Grady, 28, 4 years on the job, had frozen when Amos shouted for the power. Because you do not kill traction power on a live line on the word of a stranger you're pretty sure you're supposed to be arresting, and for 1 full second every rule he knew told him no. Then he looked at the smoke coming out of the tunnel mouth, broke the rule, and cut it. The thing nobody would think about until it had already saved a man's life. Amos didn't wait to find out whether he had. You move like the rail is live and you're grateful later. He got the older man up first, the one with the split head, in and out, because the hurt and the unconscious go before the strong. The strong can wait, the strong can help. He carried him to the shattered rear door and handed him down to Renata, who had climbed out first because Amos had listened to 30 seconds of her voice and decided she was the one. "You're my second," he told her. "You catch, you steady, you point every one of them up the tunnel to the left, toward the light I'm going to send. Nobody steps right. Right is the rail. Right is dead. Everybody goes left. Say it back." "Everybody goes left," Renata said. "Now they're yours." One at a time, he brought the car's terror to the door and made it into a line. A college kid who wouldn't let go of a laptop bag until Amos took it off his shoulder and threw it into the black. It's insured, you're not. A man in a good suit who kept saying he was fine in the flat, wrong voice of shock. A young woman locked up completely against the far seat whom Amos did not grab and did not rush because you cannot drag the frozen. You can only give them one small thing to do. Look at me, just my eyes. He held them until hers stopped shaking. Now 4 steps to that door. I'll count. 1. She moved. 2. He walked her out 4 steps into the rest of her life. That was 5. And then a woman named Marie reached the walkway, turned around, and started screaming a single name back into the smoke because her boy was still inside. Tyler, baby, I'm right here. Tyler's next, Amos said. Tyler's mine. Marie, go up the tunnel to the left. Go be the face he sees when he comes out. That's the job I need from you. Go. That was 6. He turned back into the car for the 7th, and for half a heartbeat the smoke wasn't subway smoke at all. It was coal dust and a groaning roof a mile underground, and a headlamp finding a hand that had already stopped reaching. Then the old voice woke and said the thing it had said for 15 years, in a tone exactly like his own. You always come up one short. You'll reach the last one just too late, same as before. He shoved it back down into the deep where he kept it and went for the boy. Tyler was 15, wedged into the far corner where the car had crumpled, one leg pinned to the shin under a bench frame torn off the wall. He was doing everything right without knowing it. Flat, a sleeve over his mouth, breathing in shallow sips, because terror had put him on the floor, and the floor was where the last good air had pooled. Hey, Tyler, eyes on me. Amos got down on both knees in the smoke so the boy could see his face and not just a light. I already sent your mama up the tunnel. She's out, she's safe, and I told her you'd be the next thing she sees. You and me are the last 2 down here, and I don't leave without you. So let's not keep your mother waiting. It won't. I pulled. It won't. The boy's voice was going to pieces. I know. I'm going to lift this frame maybe 4 inches. When I do, you pull your leg straight back toward me, not up. And it's going to hurt worse than anything's ever hurt you. That's good. Hurt means you're getting free. He set his shoulder under the torn bench frame, the way he'd set it under 1,000 pounds of other people's worst days in a life he had buried, took a breath of the bad air, and lifted. And that was the moment the car chose to move. It came off the wall, an inch, maybe 2, the whole dead weight of the car settling as its wrecked frame finally gave up. The bench frame bucked in his hands. The world rolled. He went down sideways, and Tyler's leg tore free all at once. He got the boy clear. The last of the lift went into a shove that sent Tyler sprawling toward the door and Renata's reaching hands. But the settling car dropped its weight across Amos's own leg and pinned it. And the roll had thrown his upper body against the low right wall, the crushed wall, the one on the side of the 3rd rail. 6 inches from his face, through a blown-out window, a power cable ripped loose in the derailment lay across the running rail, arcing, white light, on and off, the crack of a bullwhip, the blue smell of the inside of a lightning storm. The man who had just walked 6 people out of a wrecked train was now the one who could not move, his face inches from enough electricity to stop a heart. And the only 2 people close enough to reach him were the boy he'd just shoved out the door and the nurse he'd made his second. Go! He roared at Tyler. Up the tunnel, left side, go! But Tyler did not go up the tunnel. He grabbed the doorframe and screamed, "He's stuck back here, somebody, help!" And Renata Sosa, 90 feet up a pitch-black tunnel with 6 frightened people to shepherd, turned around and came back to the door. Tell me what to do, she said, her voice shaking now. Finally, but she was there. Tell me and I'll do it. Handrail. To your left. Torn loose. About 3 feet of it. Get it. He talked her through it with his teeth clenched, flat and exact, the way you talk when a wrong word costs a life. Wedge the end under the frame where it crosses my shin. Not on me. Under the frame. Tyler, get on the end of that bar with her. On 3, you both drive down on it like you're trying to break it, and I pull my leg the second there's air under it. Ready? 1, 2. On 3, they drove the bar down. The frame lifted a hand's width, and some far back part of him thought absurdly of a chock and a jack and a beam he'd once held on his own shoulders while 3 men crawled clear. Then he hauled his pinned leg free and rolled, away from the wall, away from the cable, out through the broken door onto the walkway. And the arc of white light behind him spat once more and went dead. Because the rail was dead. It had been dead for 4 minutes. Grady had killed the power from the blue light box while Amos was still bringing out the 3rd passenger, and that torn cable's white whip crack had been nothing the whole time but the last of a dead charge bleeding out of a broken wire, loud, ugly, and no longer able to kill a soul. Amos had crawled out of the reach of a snake a scared young cop had already beheaded, on the word of a stranger he was supposed to be arresting. They went up the tunnel, all three of them, on the left side, away from the rail, toward an emergency door a track inspector had walked past 10,000 times and never once dreamed he'd open with his own family's future on the other side of it. They climbed out of the ground into noise and light and the number that was still impossibly 7. Everyone was out, every single one. And for about one day, that was the whole story, and it was a beautiful one. On the platform, it was radios and running boots and paramedics coming down the stairs 2 at a time. And in the middle of it, a big man in a high-vis vest sat down hard on a bench because his pinned leg had finally gotten around to telling him it was ruined. And then, without deciding to, the way a man doesn't decide his heart should beat, he started arranging people. He put the older man flat and turned his head. He sat Tyler up against the tile and told Marie to keep the boy talking, don't let him drift. He said, her first, she's shocky, she's worse than she looks, to a paramedic who hadn't asked him anything. Amos laid 7 strangers out along the platform in a clean line, most hurt nearest the stairs, every airway clear, counting breathing under his breath, 1 and 2 and 3, his hands doing the work of a man he'd put in the ground 15 years ago. A veteran paramedic crouched next to him, watched him work for a good 10 seconds, and said it quiet, almost careful. Who taught you to lay out a triage line like that? Nobody, Amos said, not looking up. I do maintenance. He did not do maintenance in the sense the man meant, and they both knew it. The paramedic looked at him the way you look at a locked door when you're sure there's a whole room behind it. A few feet off, Officer Grady came over on unsteady legs, still the color of the tile. I almost didn't cut it, the young cop said. I stood there. Every rule in my head said no. I almost didn't. Amos looked up at Ham. But you did. I froze. Everybody freezes. That's not the job. He got to his feet, one hand on his ruined leg. The job's the part after, doing it scared. Grady would carry that sentence into every bad call for the rest of his career. And he would need it, because his supervisor's radio had already said something a lot uglier than the truth. And up on the street, a woman was already uploading 11 seconds of silent video in which a huge man in a vest kicked in a subway door and dragged bodies out of the dark. No sound, no context, a rescue or a crime depending entirely on what the person watching had already decided before they pressed play. That was the seed. It went into the ground that night and came up faster than anything true ever does. Across the city, in a third-floor apartment above a shuttered dry cleaner, a 10-year-old boy named Andre Gaines was supposed to be asleep and was not. He was on the couch with old Miss Ada from down the hall who watched him the nights his father worked, and the news was on low and a phrase crawled across the bottom of the screen. Derailment on the crosstown line, injuries reported, and Andre sat up so fast the blanket slid off. Because his father worked the crosstown line. His father walked those tunnels in the dark every single night while Andre slept, and the thing the boy was most afraid of in the whole world, more than any monster, the thing he had never once said out loud, was that one night the dark would keep his dad, and he'd be a boy without one. Miss Ada, he said, very small. That's Dad's line. Your daddy's careful, baby, Ada said, and put an arm around him and did not change the channel. They watched the silent helicopter shot of ambulances and a hole in the ground breathing smoke, and Andre whispered the 2 things his father had taught him for when the dark has you and you're scared and don't know what's next because he had nothing else to hold. Find the air, then find the door. He didn't know his father was down in that exact hole, that the man in the video was the same man who pressed his forehead every night and said those exact words over his bed. He only knew his dad worked underground, and the news was full of it. So he stayed awake and held the words until, near 2 in the morning, a key turned in the lock and his father came in filthy and limping and whole. And Andre hit him around the middle hard enough to nearly drop him on his bad leg, and Amos held his son in the doorway and told him nothing at all about where he'd been. He'd have given anything to keep it that way. But some smoke follows you home. By the next morning, the number was holding. 7 riders alive, 1 operator alive, 0 dead, out of a train that had jackknifed in a tunnel with a fire in the lead car. For about half a day, it was a miracle, and the city was decent enough to call it one. Then somebody in a suit remembered what a miracle costs. Because a train doesn't leave the rail for no reason. Something failed. And when something fails in a system that carries 4 million people a day, the only question that has ever mattered is whose name goes next to the failure. And a name was conveniently available. A big, unidentified man who'd been down on the roadway forcing doors, doing things no rider should know how to do. Corinne Vaughn read Ed Wexler's supervisor report at 6 in the morning with her second cup of coffee going cold, and in the middle of the worst week of her professional life, she saw one clean thing to hold on to. Unauthorized mail on the roadway. Forced the emergency doors. Refused to comply. She was the Transit Authority's Director of Safety, 55 years old, and she knew, because she had signed the paper herself 11 months earlier, precisely why the Halstead curve had let go under that train. So when the authority put out its first statement that afternoon, the statement did not contain the word rail. Preliminary review indicates that an unauthorized individual entered the roadway and forced open the emergency doors of the second car, breaching containment protocol and potentially contributing to the cascade of events. It was, in its horrible way, a small masterpiece. Every word was shaped like the truth without being it. It never said he caused the derailment. It set the pieces on the table and let the reader assemble them, and the reader was glad to. Because the video was everywhere by then, and the man in it still had no name. A man with no name at the center of a disaster is the easiest thing in the world to fill in wrong, and the internet did not reach for the kind version. The comments wrote themselves overnight. Why was he even down there? What was he doing on the tracks? People like that shouldn't be near the trains. By Thursday, the 11 seconds had a caption, the caption had hardened into a verdict, and the verdict had a shape a lot of people had been carrying around, ready-made, long before this train ever left this rail. And then the authority did the thing that turned an ugly news cycle into a blade against Amos Gaines's throat. They matched the man in the video to an employee badge, because he was theirs. Amos Gaines, track maintenance, overnight, 6 years of service, the man who walked the crosstown tunnels in the dark so 4 million strangers could ride them in the light, was suspended without pay, pending investigation for entering an active incident scene and violating safety protocol. He found out standing in his own kitchen at 7 in the morning, still in yesterday's work clothes, reading it off his phone while his son ate cereal 3 feet away, suspended without pay. A tidy phrase that means to a single father who is the only paycheck the household has ever had, that a clock had started running on the rent, the coat, and every other thin thing holding his small, careful life together. Dad? Andre had stopped chewing. He was 10 and too sharp by half and had been reading his father's face for years. Are you in trouble? No, buddy. Amos slid the phone into his pocket and made his voice do absolutely nothing, because that was the whole job now. Eat your breakfast. You always say that. Because it's usually true. Eat. He kissed the top of the boy's head, and the boy let him, and neither of them said the thing they were both looking at, because Amos's son got to stay a boy for exactly as long as Amos could hold the storm outside the door, and Amos meant to hold it as long as his arms lasted. That was the whole shape of Amos Gaines, a man who absorbed weather so his boy would never feel the rain. And it was exactly that habit of standing in front of the storm and saying nothing that was about to make him the easiest man in the city to hang a dead rail on. Because nobody here knew who Amos Gaines had been before he walked subway tunnels. He'd spent 6 years making sure of it, but a machine was turning now, and machines pull threads, and at the end of Amos Gaines's thread, a long way down, there was a mine. The federal investigator assigned to the derailment was a woman named Hollis Marsh, out of the National Transportation Safety Board. And Hollis Marsh did not care about the video. 22 years had taught her to distrust anything a phone showed her, and anything a press office handed her in equal measure. She cared about 2 things, the box and the rail. And when she sat down across a scarred table from the suspended track inspector the whole city had already convicted, she found a third thing she hadn't expected, and it bothered her, because Marsh did not like surprises. She found a man who would not talk about himself. "Walk me through what you did inside the car," she said, from the moment it stopped. He did, flat, clipped, economical. No color, no heroics, just decisions in the order he'd made them. The gray smoke and which way it moved and what that told him. The rear egress instead of the front. The walkway, left side away from the rail. The order he'd brought them out in, hurt first, frozen next, strong last. The count, always the count. And with every sentence, the investigator's pen slowed, because every word was a decision she'd watched get made, in her career, only by people with one particular and very expensive kind of training. The kind that takes years to build and usually a funeral or 2 to finish. "You told the officer to cut the 3rd rail power from the blue light box before you'd even opened the door," she said. "Most people who ride these trains for 30 years don't know that box exists. I walk the tracks, knowing that box is the job. You brought 7 people through smoke in a blackout without losing one, then set up a triage line a 20-year paramedic told me, I'm quoting, was cleaner than his own crews." She looked at him over her glasses and did not blink. That is not track maintenance work, Mr. Gaines. Somebody trained you to do it with the lights off and the roof coming down. I've met maybe a dozen people who move the way the man in that tunnel moved. I'd like to know where you're the 13th. Amos looked down at his hands on the table. At the coal dust, 6 years of city water had never lifted out of the creases of his knuckles. At the scar that split one eyebrow. He did not say the word mine. He did not say rescue. He did not say the name Earl Boyd, which he had not spoken aloud to another living person in 15 years. He had one rule about the deep. It stayed down in the deep where he kept it, because the last time he'd let it up into the light, it had cost him everything except the boy. I read the air, he said finally. The air always knows the way out. You just have to get quiet enough to feel which way it wants to go. It was not an answer. It was the closest thing to the truth he'd give anyone that year, and Hollis Marsh, who was very good at her job, wrote down not the words, but the way he'd said them, the way a man sounds stepping around a grave, and underlined it twice, then went to pull his employment history from before the transit authority. Not because she thought he was guilty, because she was beginning to suspect she was looking at the only person in the whole disaster who had done every single thing right, and she wanted to know what had made him. While Marsh pulled threads, the authority offered Amos a clean door out of his own life, and they wrapped it in the language of mercy. His union rep and a lawyer from the authority's council sat across a scarred table in a beige room and slid one sheet of paper over it. A statement. He would acknowledge that as an off-duty employee, he'd entered an active incident scene and forced the emergency doors against protocol, that his intentions were good but his actions improper, and that he accepted a negotiated separation, a lump sum, a neutral reference, the investigation closed quietly, no referral to any prosecutor. Sign it, and the noise stopped. Sign it, and go home to the boy. Amos looked at the paper a long time because he knew what it was under the careful words. It was rent. It was Andre's winter coat and the arithmetic between a suspended paycheck and a 30-day notice on the door. The lawyer wasn't cruel. She said gently that fighting this could eat a year of his life, that the video would follow him into every job interview he'd ever have, that a man in his position, and she let a man in his position sit in the air a second, really did have to think first and last about the child. He thought about the child. He picked up the pen. And he almost signed it, God forgive him, for about 4 seconds. With Andre's coat and the number in the bank account both in the room with him, he almost signed the lie with his own hand. Then he set the pen down because he couldn't do it that fast, and said he needed the night. And they let him, gladly, certain the night would do their work for them. What none of them knew, what Amos himself could only feel at the far edges, was that at that same hour, in a kitchen across the city, another parent sat over another pen, doing the same math on the same child-shaped steak and losing it in the opposite direction. Corinne Vaughn had come up through the maintenance side. She could read a defect the way Amos read smoke, which is exactly why she'd understood what she was signing 11 months earlier when she initialed the Halstead deferral and slid it back across the table. No money this quarter. A flag is not a failure. The line can't go dark for a maybe. 40 quiet calls a week and 39 of them cost nothing. The 40th came off the rail with a fire in the lead car. That night she sat at her own kitchen table with the hospital bills fanned out under the lamp, her phone lighting up every few minutes. Press wants a name by morning. And down the hall her grown daughter coughed in her sleep. The chronic thing, the expensive thing, the whole reason a director's salary and a good state plan only ever just barely held the line. And here is the part that mattered, the part that made her human instead of a monster. She almost did the right thing. Twice that night she opened a blank statement and typed the true sentence. The Halstead rail was flagged. The repair was deferred. My signature is on the deferral. Twice she read it back and heard in order the plan lapsing, the coverage ending, the collection letters starting again with her daughter's name on them. Twice she deleted it, one letter at a time. The third time she didn't type it at all. And she reached instead for the clean, easy answer. The stranger, the man with no name, somebody else's father. The exact same way, one kitchen across the city, a track inspector was reaching for a pen. 2 parents, 2 kitchens. The same lie on the same night. The only difference was that she had the power to make hers stick. She used it, because Andre found out at school. It happened the way these things always find children, sideways, in a hallway, from a boy whose father had shown him both the video and the caption. Your dad's the one who wrecked the train. My dad says he's going to jail. And Andre, who was 10 and small and had spent his whole life a little afraid of the dark his father walked into every night, came home and would not eat, and finally, at the kitchen sink with his back to his father, asked the question in the smallest voice Amos had ever heard him use. Did you do it, Dad? His thin shoulders were up around his ears. "Did you make the train come off the tracks?" And Amos Gaines, who had walked into the smoke for 7 strangers and would have walked in for 70, felt the floor of his chest drop clean out, because this was the one he could not carry his son out of. This was the smoke that had come home, into his own kitchen, into his own boy. He got down on his knees on the kitchen floor, the way he'd gone down on his knees in the wrecked car, so his son could see his face. "No," he said. "I pulled 7 people out of that train, and I'd walk back in tonight and do every second of it again. But some grown-ups need a name to hang a bad thing on, and I was the easiest name in the room to reach. And I'll be honest, because you're old enough, they're not wrong that I'll take it quiet if it keeps all this off you." He made himself say the rest because the boy deserved the whole truth or none of it. "There's a paper. They want me to sign it tomorrow. It says I did something wrong down there. I didn't. But signing it keeps the rent paid and makes them stop, and I told myself that was me protecting you." Andre turned around from the sink. His face was wet and furious in the total, nothing held back way that only a 10-year-old can manage. "But that's a lie." "Yeah, it is. You told me." The boy's voice broke right down the middle. 100 times. When it's dark and you're scared and you don't know what to do, you find the air, then you find the door. You said the door is always the true thing. You said you don't go toward the easy dark just 'cause it's close. You go toward the air, even when it's harder. He was crying openly now and did not care who saw. "Signing the lie is the easy dark, Dad. You taught me that. You can't go in the easy dark. You taught me." And Amos Gaines knelt on the cracked linoleum and let his 10-year-old hand him back the only thing he had ever really given the boy. The words a dying man had once pressed into a young one in a place full of smoke a mile underground. And understood, with a force that took the wind out of him, that he had been about to walk his own child straight into the exact dark he'd spent 15 years pulling other people's children out of. "Okay," he said, when he could get his voice to work at all. "Okay, we don't sign it, you hear me? We don't sign it." "We don't sign it," Andre said, fierce, and scrubbed his face with the heel of his hand, and for the first time in a long time the two of them stood on the same side of something, in the light of their own kitchen. He did not sign it. And because he refused to, the machine Hollis Marsh had quietly set in motion got the one thing it needed: time to finish. A lie in a press release is only as strong as the day's attention span, and attention is the cheapest thing a city owns. But the truth Marsh was assembling in a locked evidence room didn't live in anyone's attention at all. It lived in steel, and it didn't care what the internet had decided. She had the black box. Every train carries one, sealed at the scene, out of reach of any press office or frightened director on Earth. And it does not care what the internet decided. It logs everything, stamped to the 10th of a second. And the timeline it gave her was the whole case in one number. The train left the rail. It stopped. And 41 seconds later, the doors of the second car were forced from the inside. 41 seconds after, not 1 second before. There was no version of events in which the man who kicked that door caused anything. He'd opened it on a train already wrecked, already stopped, already filling with the smoke that would have killed everyone inside. The single fact the whole accusation stood on, that he'd forced the doors and contributed to the cascade, wasn't just false. It was impossible. And the box had known it the entire time, sitting in an evidence locker while a whole city made up its mind about the shape of a man's face. And then there was the rail. An inspection train measures the exact shape of every foot of rail in the system, automatically, caring nothing for anyone's career. 4 months before the derailment, it had run the Halstead curve and flagged that exact joint. Marsh pulled the record, then the work order that should have followed it, then the log that showed the repair opened, costed, scheduled, and deferred with a date, a budget code, and a set of initials in the margin like a fingerprint on a knife, CV. Corinne Vaughn had built an entire public case against Amos Gaines to bury a single sheet of paper with her own initials in the margin, and she'd done it by feeding investigators a man whose only crime was that he knew, in his hands and his bones, how to keep 7 strangers breathing. And the same sealed, third-party, unbudgeable machinery she'd spent a week hiding behind was the exact machinery that dug her signature back up into the light. Marsh did not hold a press conference to say any of this because she did not gloat and did not perform. The NTSB issued a preliminary factual finding, the way it always does, in flat gray language on a flat gray Tuesday, and the flat gray language ended the war in a single paragraph. The derailment resulted from a rail failure at a previously identified defect location for which corrective maintenance had been deferred. Forced entry of the second car's emergency doors occurred after the train came to rest and is consistent with the evacuation of trapped passengers. The individual who effected that evacuation is credited by investigators with the survival of all 7 occupants of that car. Credited with the survival of all 7. The city, which had been so certain, turned on a dime, the way cities do, with no memory of ever having been certain of the opposite the week before. The video got a new caption overnight. Renata Sosa, the nurse he'd made his second in the dark, told a reporter exactly what a man in a high-vis vest had done 90 feet underground, and how the last thing he did before carrying the boy out was get pinned beside a live rail and spend his air screaming at everyone else to run. Officer Grady amended his incident report and told investigators he'd cut the power because a stranger on the roadway had ordered him to, and that the stranger had been right. Walt Summers, the operator, who'd known from the first half-second that the rail had let go under his own train and not under any man's boot, finally said so where it counted. And Ed Wexler, the supervisor whose report had first put the words unauthorized mail into the world, spent those weeks insisting he'd only followed protocol, a scared man who'd guessed wrong about which direction the danger was coming from, until the record closed over him and moved on. And Corinne Vaughn's initials, in the end, finished her the same way the sealed box finished the lie. Not in a dramatic hearing, but with a document, a date, and a signature that could not be talked out of having existed. She resigned before they could ask her for it. There would be an investigation and consequences, the slow, grinding, institutional kind that never make a good headline. Amos never said one public word against her. When a reporter finally got to him, camera up, and asked how he felt about the woman who'd tried to pin a derailment on him and cost him his job, he was quiet, a long moment, then gave an answer that wasn't the one the reporter had driven across town to get. "She's got a kid she's scared for," Amos said. "So do I. I just didn't have the power to hurt anybody with mine." And that was the entire quote he would ever give them. Because he had knelt over his own pen in his own kitchen not 72 hours before, and he knew down to the inch how close a frightened parent stands to the easy dark, and there was not enough hatred in him to spend on a person for standing where he'd so nearly stood himself. They reinstated him. Back pay, the suspension struck from his record, an apology written in language a committee had visibly spent a week sanding down to nothing. There was talk of a commendation, a ceremony, a photograph for the paper. Amos did with the ceremony what he had done with every honor his whole vanished life had ever tried to hand him. He did not show. But one evening, a few weeks later, after the noise had gone quiet and the reporters had found a newer thing to point at, Amos did something he had not done in 15 years. He sat his son down on the couch, turned off the television, and told the boy about the deep. He told him there had been a mine, that he'd been the captain of a rescue team once, a long way from any subway, and that his whole job back then had been to go down after men when the dark had already gotten them. And he told him about the last night, the fire and bad air a mile underground, a young crew he'd been sent to bring back, and the roof coming down in the space between those men and the only way home. There was a man named Earl Boyd, Amos said. The first time he'd spoken that name aloud in his son's entire life, and something in his voice did a thing it never did. He trained me. He was about the closest thing to what a father's supposed to be that I ever got, seeing as I didn't come up with one of my own. And that last night, the air went bad, and I only had so much left in the rig on my back, and there were 3 young guys past me who had none at all. He had to stop. He started again, lower. Earl took the rig off his own back. He put his air on me. He said, "Get the young ones out and go home and go be somebody's father someday." And then he stayed to hold up a section that was coming down so the 4 of us could get past it. And I got those 3 young men to the surface alive. His eyes were wet, and for once he let them be in front of his son on purpose. And I never got Earl. Andre had gone completely still. The specific stillness children fall into when they know they are being handed something heavy and real and theirs to keep. "That's why you walk in the dark," the boy said slowly, working it out. "Every single night. That's why it has to be you." "For 15 years I told myself I owed him," Amos said. "A man gives you his last air, you spend your whole life trying to be worth it, and you never are. So you keep walking down into the dark alone, where there's nobody left to lose." He put one big hand on the back of his son's neck. "But that boy on the train. When I went back for him, I wasn't paying Earl back. I was doing what Earl did, giving it away instead of owing it." His voice gave out, and he let it. "You can't pay it back, son. You can only pass it on. Find the air," Andre said very quietly, then find the door." Amos didn't answer. He just pulled his boy in against his chest and held on and let the words a dead man had given a young one a mile underground finish the trip they'd been making for 15 years, down through him and into his son and back. And that was the moment. Not the rescue in the tunnel, not the finding that cleared his name. Just a man and his son on a worn-out couch, a name said out loud at long last, and a debt that had been crushing one of them for 15 years, turning in a single conversation into something a person could actually stand up and carry. Because it turned out the thing had never been a debt at all. It had been a gift, and gifts, unlike debts, are built to keep moving. There is a train that runs the crosstown line in the daylight, and on a bright, ordinary Saturday, a few weeks after all of it, a big man and a 10-year-old boy rode it together, standing at the front of the first car, both their faces to the glass. He'd wanted to show his son something that could only be shown from here. When the train dropped off the elevated track into the tunnel and the morning light cut out and the black throat of the thing closed around the windows, Andre did not flinch. Because his father's hand was flat and warm on his shoulder and his father was pointing at the dark. See that, up ahead on the left? That little blue light? That's an emergency box. One every so often the whole system over, and that gap in the wall, that's the walkway. Runs the entire line, both directions. Means a person's never really trapped down here. There's always a way out on foot if you know it's there. The tunnel streamed past, thrown into hard shape for 1 second at a time by each passing lamp. Looks like there's nothing down here but dark, but there's people down here all night, every night, walking every inch of it, so that in the morning you get to ride straight through in the light and never once think about a single one of them. Andre pressed his forehead to the glass and watched the black rush by, and it was only the dark now. Not a thing to be afraid of anymore. Because his father had taught him the two things a person does when the dark finally has them, and neither of them had ever been to give up on the door. Ahead of them, the Halsted curve was finally being torn out and rebuilt, a rail that could have been fixed for money, fixed instead for 7 lives and a lie that didn't hold. And a man who'd once been handed a dying stranger's last breath rode straight through the dark with his son and understood at last that he'd finally passed it on. The people who keep you safe are almost never the ones you can see. They're the ones out ahead of you in the dark, walking the line so your way stays open, and you never learn a single one of their names. So here's to the ones with no names. If somebody ever walked into the dark so you could keep standing in the light, stay with me. There's another one of them in the next story.